have some great HOA stories for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Here's our first one. This story takes place in an HOA, entitled Lady Tries to Take My Surfboard After Trespassing on Private Property by Sack of Memes. So to set the scene, I live in a very small beach town in North Carolina. We get a crazy amount of tourists in the summer months, but not quite as much as Myrtle Beach, a large city in South Carolina, one of the most popular on the East Coast outside of Florida. We get our fair share of naive tourists, and during my time as a lifeguard, I probably got asked 3,000 questions about sharks or jellyfish or stingrays in a day. Instead of saving people from the water, I spent most of my time telling people to stay off the dunes, or telling people not to swim up to the boats. So anyway, the cast composed of myself, a naive entitled Karen tourist, and her naive entitled Kevin's son. So anyway, I saw that there was supposed to be some excellent surf one day and decided to head to the beach for a little shredding action. My beach access is part of a private neighborhood and it's paid for by my HOA, which means that it's private property. Once I get up to it, I see a middle-aged woman and her son, maybe 6 or 7, standing at the gate, holding floats. I think, great, I'll have a little arguing to do, because people are supposed to stay off unless they pay taxes for it to be maintained. So I walk up, and the convo goes a little like this. Karen says, "Hey, what's the code for this beach access?" "Well, it's a private access," I say. "Are you visiting? I haven't seen your face around here. Where are you staying?" She points to a house that isn't part of the HOA, and it was developed after my neighborhood was. "Oh, that house is part of a different neighborhood. That one uses a public access. See where the sidewalk is?" "Oh, come on, it's right across the street. Just tell us the code." "No, ma'am, this access is paid for by our own taxes. There's a public access literally 50 feet to the left with no code." "No, I demand that you let me and my son through, or I will call the police." "Go ahead. In the meantime, I'm going to use the public access. If you care to join me on the beach, then you can follow me on that access." I left her and her son red-faced like that, and I walked to the public access. About 10 minutes go by, and I kind of forget about the pair. I'm putting wax on my board and waiting for my friend to show up in the meantime. I turn away from my board to head down and look at the water, and look for a good spot or a rip current. And lo and behold, I see the kid trying to lift my board and his mom grinning at him. Keep in mind that my board is a 9-foot beast that has to weigh at least 50 pounds. My dad got it in Maui 20 years ago from a custom board store that's no longer open, and it cost at least $700 to $800. I run back up to the pair, and my usually good nature was out the window. "Hey lady, get the heck off of my stuff. How dare you speak to me like that?" "I'll speak to you however I want to speak to you. Tell your son to just quit grabbing at my stuff." At this point, he had it fins up and was sitting on it, which is a massive no-no for surfing. It curves upward, and if you put too much weight on it, it might snap. I yanked it out from under him, and he fell forward into the sand. "Get away from my son. I'm gonna sue you until you need to file for bankruptcy." "What the heck, lady? I'm defending my property. You can't sue me for crap." "Frickin' pedo, my baby just wanted to see it. He wasn't hurting anyone." At this point, her son is bawling and he is screaming something along the lines of, "Mommy, he broke my rib." Grow up, kid. Lady, don't touch my stuff again or I'll call the police on you. At this point, a lot of people around me are angry at this lady, and I notice my friend has shown up and has a massive grin on his face. When I look away to make a face at him, the lady tries to yank the board out of my hands. I just let it drop. It falls onto her and she buries her butt in the sand. I snatch it back up from her and jerk a thumb at my friend to run to the water. I turn to the kid and I say, "Don't turn out like your mother." I then turn and run towards the water with my friend and fill him in, and from what we can see from the waves, the lady is getting shamed off of the beach by the other beachgoers, most of whom knew me and knew I wouldn't fly off the handle unless it was something crazy. How would you handle Karen if you were OP? Holy crap, that's not good parenting, man. I say that as a dad. After high school ended, I was in a pretty bad place mentally, so I decided to make some extremely unwise decisions during my first year of college. I was basically always on something in order to keep what I later realized was severe depression at bay. For a variety of misplaced reasons, I also decided to join a fraternity. It was a convenient way to keep getting the things I thought I needed at the time, but mostly I just craved human connection in a way that I thought being a brother would bring. Well, I didn't see it for a while, but I was wrong. The fraternity had a house on campus that was allocated to them, but it might as well have been off campus because of how crazy the parties were. Campus police would rarely pass by, let alone come in, no matter how much noise was being made. Still, that made it the perfect place for me. I could let loose and escape the sadness that followed me around during the day without being bothered, and the people there seemed to like me well enough that they at least tolerated my being around so often. At first, it was just official parties on the weekends, and then every weekend, Thursday nights, Wednesday nights, until at one point I was spending hours drinking there every night of the week to hide from myself. Before I knew it, my first semester was over, and the shallow friendships I had made through the bonds of getting ridiculously messed up had started to pay off, or so I thought. They told me they'd be extending an offer to be a pledge next semester. For those that don't know, pledging is a process that lasts, for this particular chapter of this fraternity, one semester, and is something that you have to go through to officially become a brother or a member of a fraternity. I was ecstatic. My second semester rolls around, and I'm given the invitation in traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity fashion. Once again, I was ecstatic. The thought that I was actually wanted and valued by these people who I thought had it all figured out felt like it would be the highlight of my year. I never really fit in with most members of the fraternity because other than excess consumption of illegal substances and alcohol, we didn't really have much in common. But I started to look up to these guys. While most of my time there passed me by in a haze of my own creation, the moments that I remembered made them seem like kind, cool, and genuine people. Although most of my friendships during that year were with the people from this particular fraternity, I had made some friends in my own dorm hall as well. One night after pre-gaming in someone's dorm, I was happy for any excuse to start drinking at 3 p.m., a couple girls came up to me. They asked why I was pledging at that particular frat given its reputation. Why someone as nice as me would want to be around people like that. I asked what they were talking about, and they told me that this particular frat house has a reputation as a place where girls shouldn't get too drunk, trying to be as not graphic as possible here. I told them that it must be a rumor that started because of guys who'd already graduated, because there was just no way any of the brothers that I knew would ever do something like that. I second-guessed my sense of belonging for the first time that night, but was too starved for human connection to seriously consider that I might not be making the best choices. Still, a small crack had formed in the facade that I had built around these people. Another night, I overheard a couple of the brothers talking when I woke up to use the bathroom, talking about how they desperately needed members to keep the house and how it was a shame that they had to let me become a brother at the end of the semester because they'd normally never let someone like me in. Fine, I thought, that's how these three feel, but most of the others like me and they actually want me here. Wrong. But my life was in pieces before I got to college, and I was so desperate for friends and a sense of belonging that I was willing to rationalize, anything to keep the lie going. One night, while doing a traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity event, read consuming copious amounts of alcohol to the point of serious risk, for the brothers and pledges only, I did what they expected of me, and, consumed copious amounts of alcohol to the point of serious risk. For anonymity's sake, I won't describe the event for privacy's sake, but I was in and out of blacking out for a while until a certain point when I stopped remembering anything. Over the years, though, some things have come back to me as I've tried to process this experience. I have flashes of being turned over and someone holding my head so I throw up in a trash can and not myself or the chair that I was on. There's a slideshow of me walking down half the stairs. One of the last things that I remember is asking to stay the night in one of the brothers' rooms because I knew, somehow, that I was ridiculously drunk and didn't want to go get caught when going back to mine. He said no. He was my closest friend there. It should have been clear to anyone around that I wasn't safe, but these guys were still giving me crappy light beer instead of water because it's basically the same thing. I'll never get that line, or the laughter that followed, out of my head. Instead of getting me help or even just letting me stay there, one of the brothers just took me back to my dorm. Luckily for me, an RA saw me being brought in essentially over his shoulder and felt like that I was in danger, so she called for help. Even after all these years, the last thing that I remember from that night is answering a knock at the door of my dorm. When I woke up in the hospital the next morning, I was told that I could have died. They described how I acted, and it was clear to me after just hearing about it that I was in danger. My BAC blood alcohol concentration was at 0.37, and there was somehow still more in my stomach that I hadn't thrown up before they pumped it. For reference, alcohol poisoning can cause death and generally shows up around 0.3, while 0.4 is potentially fatal on its own because your heart or lungs can just stop working. My RA almost certainly saved my life. When I was sitting in that hospital bed, I cried. Not because I might have died, but because I felt like my life that was just getting back had fallen apart again. I felt broken and betrayed and profoundly sad that the people I had trusted didn't care enough about me to try and keep me alive. When I got back to campus, I had to meet with the disciplinary officer because of underage drinking, and he questioned where I got the alcohol and who I was with and so on. But apart from that, I just followed my usual routine that I was accustomed to. It was the weekend, so I went down to the frat house. I still don't know why, really. I think I was just numb and going through the motions, or maybe I wanted a sense of normalcy. When I got there, all the feelings of sadness turned to anger. As I told them what had happened, the people that I half-heartedly expected to be happy to see me were more concerned about what I might have said to the disciplinary officer than the fact that I was alive. They were wrong to do that, for the record, because I covered their butts completely. But I was livid. These people, they were supposed to be my brothers, and how dare they leave me for dead? How dare they feign concern for me when all they really want is to protect themselves? I made an excuse that I had just wanted to update them, but was tired and still recovering, so that I could go back to my dorm. I stewed in anger and resentment for hours. I thought about all the things that I had experienced, all the warning signs, and I made a plan. First, I set up a new email account and got the faculty email for the head of the disciplinary committee, calling him committee head now, the full title it's annoying to type out every time. A guy who apparently really hated the presence of fraternities on campus housing. I told him that I was a student who had information about crimes committed by the members of this particular fraternity, and I wanted them gone, not just from their house, but from the school. I also talked to one of the girls who took me aside in my dorm, one I felt that I could trust, and asked if she, or anyone she knew, had experiences, names, or anything. She wasn't willing to step forward personally, but she knew someone who was and helped me get in touch. 3 days later, I met with the committee head at 4 a.m. in someone else's office. I didn't want to be seen because I didn't want anyone to know what was going on or have any heads up. I asked him what he needed to take their house, and he told me. He amended the report I gave to the original disciplinary officer to include 2 accidental mentions of a particularly relatively uncommon alcohol, one this fraternity always uses for their traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity-only drinking events. For what it's worth, that alcohol was actually present, so it wasn't exactly a lie. Apparently, just that much was enough for an investigation and wouldn't need me to be involved any more than I already was, which was something that I insisted on. The investigation merely being open was also enough that one anonymous tip-off, say, where certain quantities of certain illegal substances were likely to be hidden within that frat house, was also enough for campus police to come knocking, with real police in tow, to tear that place apart if enough was found the first time. Remember, the house is owned by the school, so as long as the school gives the police permission to search, and they have enough reason to, they're good to go. I also got him in contact with the brave girl who was willing to come forward with her story. I don't know if she ever got real justice, but I do know that one member of the frat suddenly dropped out between the first time that I met with committee head and when the police came. I hope she did. I made myself scarce around the frat house for a month or so with the excuse that I needed to stop drinking. I didn't stop, at least at that point, because I needed some reason for my distance. Even though I wasn't around as often as I once was, I did spend enough time there to put various amounts of illegal substances in places that people wouldn't look until the time was right. I've never been a rich guy, so it wasn't much, but pretty much every other room had enough for a minor possession charge thanks to my generosity. When the house eventually got flipped and the substances were found, I dropped out because, despite my best attempts to hide it, at that point, most of the brothers were keeping me at arm's length and looking at me with suspicion. It was near the end of my semester anyway, and I had gone from doing fairly well in my first semester to failing most of my classes in the second, so I thought it was probably for the best. I still got to see some of them get dragged out of the house in handcuffs, and it was so worth it. When it was all said and done, the frat house was essentially raided twice. At least 3 of the brothers dropped out while facing serious possession charges that I had nothing to do with. Those were their substances, and the rest of them had to separate, moving into other dorms or already scarce off-campus housing when the fraternity was banned by the school from ever having an official on-campus house for the next decade. Many of them also got minor possession charges on their own, or thanks to me. This was almost a decade ago now, and I don't regret it at all, apart from the fact that I didn't do something sooner. Eventually, I got help for my mental health, and I no longer abuse substances or alcohol to cope with the pain. I also transferred away from that crappy heckhole of a school with just 1 good semester on my transcript, though I never did get around to finishing my degree because I spent years in a self-destructive spiral and all my money on therapy to pull myself out. I just hope that what I did made it at least slightly less likely for others to be in danger, one way or another, and that all the people who deserved it got what was coming to them. The pessimist in me, well, doubts it, but I like to think that they did. At the very least, I know that fraternity doesn't have any presence at my former school anymore. Seems like it's kinda hard to get new recruits when you lose the only thing you had going for you and your already crappy reputation gets worse. They screwed me out of my pay, I screwed them out of their company, posted by Hunting the Wumpus. Many years ago, I got a job with a marketing company during phone deregulation. It was the Wild West, and a lot of small long-distance companies sprang up, all trying to get a piece of the pie. Eventually, they all got bought up by the same bigger fish, but at the time, they were all paying hired gun marketing firms very well to score contracts for them to lock people in. I got a job with one of these marketing firms, a new age capitalism company that insisted we all do yoga and breathing exercises while they rang a little bell and gave us affirmations about how many contracts we were all going to sell and how much money we'd all make. The job was 100% commission, but I was always good at sales, so I looked at the pay scale and noticed that it was exponential, presumably to entice people to work hard with impossible payouts. We were allowed to work as many or as few hours as we wanted, with the payout based on your weekly sales numbers. I decided that I would give it a shot for 1 week to see how much I could realistically make before deciding whether I was willing to put up with the tasteless vegan snacks and mandatory voluntary yoga regime. For the next week, I pushed myself as hard as I could. For 7 straight days, I worked 14+ hour days every single day and used every trick and technique that I had learned doing sales to score as many contracts as I possibly could. I figured this would tell me my maximum possible income and could decide on that basis whether to stay. At the end of the week, I had blown everyone else out of the water. In fact, I had not just gotten more contracts than anyone there had ever seen in a week, I had gotten more than any of them had seen in a month. Because of the exponential scale, I realized that I was making absolutely ridiculous amounts of money, $10,000 and more a week. They had never expected anyone could actually hit those kinds of numbers. Coming in the next week, expecting a huge payday, I ended up with about 5% of what I expected. They told me there were problems with a lot of my contracts, and that I would be allowed to fix them and submit them a few at a time over the next several weeks. These problems were things like an apostrophe wasn't quite clear or the dash in someone's phone number was slightly crooked. They were going to screw me. That night, I got a phone call from the company's office manager, Frank, who wanted to meet up for a drink. Curious, I agreed. Over beers, Frank told me that the owners of the company were in a panic because I would have bankrupted them. He said that they spread out all of my contracts on the floor of the office and then they crawled over them, inspecting each one and trying to figure out if I was committing some kind of fraud. When they comprehended that all of my contracts were legit, they decided that they had no choice but to screw me over. Frank told me he realized at that point that if they would screw me, they'd screw him too, and besides, he was tired of doing yoga. He asked me if I would be interested in going into business with him and to go head to head with his bosses. I thought it sounded intriguing, but I asked him how he thought we could compete. Frank explained that he had found out that they didn't actually have the contract for our city. They were acting as independent contractors for another company who had the contract to market the service in an entirely different city. They were poaching here because the person who did have the contract wasn't actively using it. We put together a pitch and approached the guy with the real contract, Joe, and told him about the people poaching his turf. We agreed that we'd split it with him. We'd take the upfront money for each contract and he'd get the back-end money down the road. It was a good deal for everyone, so Joe contacted the phone company and had them threaten the poachers with a big lawsuit if they didn't stop. A week later, Frank and I strolled into the offices of our old employer. Most of the furniture and all the yoga mats were gone. And there was just a table, a couple of filing cabinets, and a file box with the final pay envelopes for everyone. I made a show of counting my money to make sure it was all there, and the two owners, husband and wife, told Frank and I bitterly that they'd had to take cash advances on their credit cards for this money and asked me if I felt guilty for destroying their lives. I smiled and said nope and left. Our marketing company made us a lot of money over the year until the company got bought up by Sprint and the gravy train ended. Sued the HOA. They towed my truck twice off my property with updates. Click the video on your screen so you find the final fallout of this one, and I'll see you there.